A trolley, a lever, and 5 people tied to the track. Pull the lever, and the trolley switches to a side track, where it kills 1 person instead. Almost everyone says, pull it. Now change 1 detail. No lever this time. Just you, standing on a footbridge, next to a large stranger. The only way to stop the trolley is to push him over the edge. His body stops it before it reaches the 5. Same math. 1 life traded for 5. Almost nobody pushes him. That gap between the lever you'll pull without hesitating and the man you won't push, no matter how hard you try to convince yourself, is the trolley problem. And more than 50 years after it was first written down, philosophers still haven't agreed on why that gap exists. Here's the puzzle in its cleanest form. 2 situations. In both, you can save 5 lives by taking 1. In both, you're the one who acts. In both, the person who dies would have been fine if you'd done nothing. Logically, the 2 cases look identical, but almost nobody feels like they're identical. Something about pulling a lever feels different from putting your hands on another human being and shoving him to his death, even when the outcome, on paper, is exactly the same. Explaining that feeling in a way that actually holds up turns out to be much harder than it sounds. Here's what most people get wrong about the trolley problem. They assume some philosopher sat down to invent a clever trolley riddle. That's not what happened. In 1967, a British philosopher named Philippa published an essay called The Problem of Abortion and the Doctrine of the Double Effect. It wasn't about trolleys. It was about abortion, and about a much older idea in moral philosophy called the Doctrine of Double Effect. The claim that there's a moral difference between harm you cause as a means to a good outcome and harm you merely foresee as a side effect of doing something good. To test that idea, Foote used a comparison. A trolley driver, brakes gone, can steer onto a side track and kill 1 workman instead of 5. Foote said, that's permissible. Then she compared it to a judge who could frame and execute 1 innocent man to satisfy a mob and save 5 hostages. Foote said, that is not permissible, even though, again, it's 1 life for 5. The trolley was never the point. It was a small illustration inside a much bigger argument. The person who actually turned this into the trolley problem, who named it, popularized it, and pushed it into the shape you know today, was an American philosopher named Judith Jarvis Thomson at MIT. In a 1976 essay called Killing, Letting Die, and the Trolley Problem, she took Foote's comparison and sharpened it. Thomson introduced the version that makes people uncomfortable. The footbridge. No driver, no lever, just a bystander, watching from above, who could push 1 man off a bridge to physically block the trolley with his body, saving the 5 below. Oh yeah, ask most people about the lever, and they'll pull it without much agonizing. Ask them about the footbridge, and something changes. Same number of deaths, same math, but now it feels like murder. Thomson spent decades returning to this question, and later in her career, she concluded that the simpler switch-the-lever version isn't really where the philosophical difficulty lives at all. It's close to settled. The footbridge is the one that's never stopped being genuinely hard. So why do they feel different? This is the actual substance of the trolley problem, not the story, the reasoning underneath it. One answer, going back to that doctrine of double effect, is about means versus side effects. On the footbridge, the man's death isn't incidental. His body is the mechanism. You need him to die and be in the way for the plan to work at all. Pull him off the bridge and have him miraculously survive, and the 5 still die. On the lever track, the 1 person dying is an unfortunate side effect of redirecting the trolley. If he happened to jump clear at the last second, your plan still worked. The 5 are still saved. He's not being used. He's just in harm's way. Another way philosophers frame it, on the footbridge, you're treating a person as an object, a tool, a trolley stopper, using him without his consent purely as a means to someone else's benefit. On the track, you're redirecting an existing threat, not manufacturing a new one out of a human body. Neither explanation fully satisfies everyone. Critics have poked holes in both for decades. That's what makes this a genuine, unsolved philosophical puzzle, and not just a fun thought experiment with an obvious answer. Here's a detail almost nobody brings up. Foote and Thomson didn't invent this shape of dilemma from nothing. As early as 1905, a philosopher named Frank Chapman Sharp gave University of Wisconsin students a questionnaire that included a switchman scenario. a railway worker choosing who a runaway train would hit. Decades before that, in 1930 and 1951, German legal scholars Karl Engisch and Hans Welsel were wrestling with structurally similar problems inside legal theory, asking when causing a death counts as justified. So the trolley problem, as famous as it's become, isn't really where this question started. Foote and Thomson didn't invent the puzzle. They're the ones who gave it a name, a clean formulation, and dragged it into the center of modern philosophy. You might think this is a purely academic exercise. 5 made-up workers, 1 made-up bridge. It isn't. Self-driving cars have to make split-second decisions when a crash is unavoidable. Brake and hit what's ahead, or swerve and risk someone else. That is structurally a trolley problem, except now it's not a philosopher's thought experiment. It's code, written in advance, deciding who a machine protects before the situation ever happens. The auto industry has had to publicly grapple with exactly this question. Do you just count lives, or does how the harm happens, and to whom, matter too? Nobody has a clean answer. Which is, in a strange way, exactly Philippa Foote's point, decades before a self-driving car existed. So the trolley problem was never really about trolleys. It's about the fact that most of us are running 2 different moral rule books at once. One for outcomes, one for actions, and most of the time we don't notice, because most of the time they agree with each other. It's only when someone builds the one scenario where they don't, a lever versus a bridge, that the disagreement inside your own head becomes impossible to ignore. If you had to choose the lever or the bridge, which one would actually stop you? Tell us in the comments and subscribe, because next time we're looking at a psychological phenomenon almost as famous as this one, the bystander effect, and the real disputed story of the case that supposedly proved it.